Welcome everyone to Male Fuzz TV. I am Peter, and today I'm going to be talking about For All Mankind Season 1 Episodes 8, 9 and 10, which are titled Rupture, Bent Bird, and A City Upon a Hill, respectively. So yeah, I was super excited to finish off the season, and it's taken a little bit longer to get this last video. I was actually ahead of releasing. By the time I put the first video out, I'd already watched, I think, at least 2, if not all 3 of the episodes for the next one. I had a big gap between 9 and 10, so I went back and skimmed those 2 episodes, 8 and 9, before I watched 10. And I am delighted to say that I loved the finale. I loved the last couple of episodes, really, ultimately. I think this is a really great season of TV. I think it got better, by and large, as it went along. And there was a lot of great moments in the finale that kind of punctuate what the season was doing as a whole. That were really good for character arcs, that were really good for finishing things off. And then on top of all of that, you had great spectacle in the last couple of episodes, especially, which, we've had them going into space, we've had them landed on the moon stuff looks great, but there was actually some action sequences in episodes 9 and 10. Episode 9 has this amazing set piece with 2 ships and an accidental thruster going off, and it's really quite gut-wrenching, and it looks great. For a TV show, this is immaculate. Apple definitely pumped money into this thing, and it's refreshing. And and I'm sure I've said this before already at this point, because the shows look really great up until now, but some modern movies don't have effects that look like this anymore. These are the big movies I'm talking about Marvel movies. The effects in the Marvel movies look like shit. And here you've got a TV show that's putting the effort in to making all of their moments in space look and feel great and feel like a big deal. So I applaud that first and foremost, because those sequences were very exciting. Everything with the setup of this running thing of we can't get a ship up to relieve Ed, who's stuck on the moon. We're finally sending up Apollo, I think it's 24, with Deke and Ellen on it, and then the red shirt is the third one, whose death is spectacular. The way he gets pulled into the thruster, like, exhaust, or whatever you want to call it, is wonderful. It is visceral in the way it happens, and just shows how dangerous all this is. And then having like Deke strapped to the outside of the ship as it takes off, just everything about it feels dangerous. But they have this failure to ignite. They just they're up in the orbit and they can't go. And it's like, what's going on? There's a computer failure. So we end up having Apollo 25, which wasn't meant to be going to the moon. It was just meant to go up and repair a satellite or something like that. Now its mission is to go up and swap out the computer on Apollo 24 with a new one to make it work, so they can go and relieve Ed. And we get this really exciting double ship sequence. Apollo 25's got Molly and Tracy on it. And that stuff's really entertaining as well, because Apollo 24 launches accidentally when it's not in the right place, so the trajectory's all off and it's going into deep space, and it leaves episode 9, I think, really effectively by not knowing if they were okay, like not knowing if they're even alive on the ship. Now I figured they would be, because like we're going to do something with that in episode 10, but it's a good ending cliffhanger to episode 9 to not even know. We never see them again once they fire off, really. Not the characters anyway. We maybe see the ship from a distance. But we focus on Apollo 25 and the fact that in this action, Molly has went untethered and is, just flying around in space. In fact, I think she's attached to Apollo 25 or 24 at first and detaches herself intentionally. And there's a lot of tension here. There's a lot of characters saying, okay, how do we save her? And Margot, who's in charge of everything here, is saying, we don't, because it's not worth risking the other 2 astronauts. And Tracy says, F that, we're not doing that. Gordo kind of like backs that up as well. And, Margot gives in and goes for it. And everyone's like, let's do it. So, yeah, we get this great tense sequence, and the way it's shot's beautiful, where they kind of lose her, and there's nothing to really mark where she is. And Margot, or Molly's just trying to like tell them where to point, because she can see them because the light's on. And you just get this great shot of it, just, the ship just turns a little bit, and the light from the ship kind of illuminates her, and they find her. And it's, it's just a big, very theatrical, big like the spectacle, like I said, that word comes up a lot here. And there's a fair bit of it in episode 10 as well. But I think episode 9 sequence, this sequence of the ship flying off by accident and all the turmoil that's left in its wake is pretty spectacular. So loved all that stuff from an action point of view, excitement, all that stuff. So obviously we pick up that in episode 10, and there's so many character things. I should probably, before I move any further, I should go back to episode 8 and just kind of talk about a couple of things in that. Obviously, I said last video, because obviously we had the accident with Shane, I said, I'm sure he's not dead, we're going to spend time in the hospital. We did spend time in the hospital, so I was right about that, but he did not last very long. He did actually die by the end of episode 8. And it was used exceptionally well in the sense that so much of Karen's character arc has been this person who is averse to change, averse to sort of like seeing anything differently than the way it's been sort of, she's been built to see things her whole life. The way she looks down at other people if they don't, fit the conservative view that she's kind of been molded into. And she kind of finally, when she does go through this tragedy, and it's in episode 9 where she doesn't want to be with the other wives of astronauts, she doesn't want to be with that group of that she's kind of associated with by social default. She goes to Molly's husband and seeks comfort in him because he feels real to her. And she finally sees things in a few different ways. And one of my favorite scenes, actually, it's a smaller scene, but one of my favorite scenes in the final episode is where she goes to the bar and meets Pam, whose name I finally remembered. She meets Pam, the bartender, and I love this scene because it's got layers to it, where Karen basically says it was an unwritten rule that she never came here, and then finally says that the men's rules are all bullshit. And she kind of says it very definitively. It feels like she's confident and she's saying it, and it feels she's finally willing to accept that things should change and that she shouldn't just facilitate. And it's not because she's turning on her husband, it's not because of anything like that. It's just she's finally realizing the confines that she was in. And it took a really big tragedy for her to kind of like get to that point. Like the cost of her learning this lesson to some extent was the life of her child. And like the actress here, she gave a lot of really great moments in her performance in episode 8. She doesn't really believe it's that serious, and then when the doctor says it's brain damage and it was a life-saving measure, she starts freaking out. There's like moments throughout the episode where she's kind of refusing to accept how severe it is, and kind of like until the final conversation comes with the sort of the second opinion doctor who's like checking his brain to tell her that there's no hope really. Like she just breaks down in that scene. But one of the, and I realize I'm drifting from the point I was going to make about. I'll go back to that in a second actually. So the scene in the bar in episode 10, I really wanted to bring this up because she says these things to Pam, and Pam kind of smirks and says, well, like obviously she agrees with the sentiment, but she's like, like you're an astronaut's wife. You're pretty well off. You're worshipped as an astronaut's wife. The press come and talk to you about what your husband does. Like, you're pretty privileged, right? As much as it's great you've had these revelations and you are learning these things, you're part of the reason why it took you so long to learn about them really is because you live in such a position of privilege versus someone else. In this case with Pam, obviously Pam is secretly hiding the fact that she's gay and all the baggage that brings with it. So she has this very different perspective. Obviously, when she finds out exactly who this woman is she's talking to and knows that she's just lost her son, she's a bit more apologetic about it. And even before that, she's apologetic. She admits that she's feeling a bit, raw, and it kind of brings up that she cares about Ellen, and which leads to Karen inviting her to the family room at the base. But I think I like this scene so much because it pointed out the growth in Karen, but then also said and contextualized it and said, yes, but it's coming from this very particular point of view, and even highlighted why it took such a monumentous event to actually get her to break through in that sense. And I think the scene, to go back to episode 8, one of the plot threads running through that is whether or not they should all tell Ed. because everyone knows at a certain point that the son, Shane, is dying, or has died, and they're debating, do we tell him? And most people other than Deke are saying we shouldn't, but of course it's a great moment when Margot says, has anyone actually asked his wife? And maybe to everyone's surprise, she immediately says, no, don't tell him. But her character's whole theme all season has been kind of this sheltered view of the world, right? It's been like, no, we can't change things. Women shouldn't go to space because that's making a mockery of what you do. All that kind of stuff. So in a weird way, it kind of fits, but also it does, there's a logic to it. As cold as it might be, like, he is on his own. There's no one for him to lean to. Like, if he freaks out and breaks down, like, the death of a child when you can't cope with it, like it could lead to a suicide even. Like, that's not a ridiculous thing to question in the situation that he's in. And he's already feeling, this loneliness, this cabin fever. He's been up there longer than he's supposed to. There's already, the psychological strain on him's already pretty tough. You add on this, and it's this extreme, extra thing. But the scene that it gets to that's kind of wonderful is, whilst they're still lying to him, Karen's scheduled to make a call with him, like she's been doing. And she has to go in and pretend that everything's okay. And eventually Ed asks, oh, how was the basketball game? And starts asking. And Karen goes from being kind of awkward to almost enjoying telling him this fake story, that for one final couple of minutes she gets to pretend that her son's still alive and gets to live in the fantasy with him, because to Ed right now this is real. So all of Ed's reactions are real, and she's kind of feeding off that a little bit. But I think this kind of last hurrah of living a fantasy of some kind is kind of a monumental point for her as well. Obviously she's heartbroken every time she goes back to Shane's room, or the following episode. She's kind of a mess for a lot of it. This awakening that she has as a result of her son's death, it really does feel like a payoff to all the seeds that have been planted throughout the season. Even Shane and Tracy's son's delinquency. I know Tracy's son owns up to being behind a lot of it because he feels guilty, but even that, she's in denial. She can't accept that her son is doing this, or that he has problems, that he needs to be, maybe get serious help, either from a therapist or a counselor or whatever. She can't accept so many things in her world. Anything that doesn't fit into her box for most of the season, she just won't accept, and thinks it's ridiculous or crazy that anything would challenge it. And at the end, she's kind of unleashed, and she is say, screw this. She gets to feel a bit more free, and the price for this freedom was rather high, unfortunately, but it does kind of it fits into one of the other great themes of the season, which kind of came full circle for me by the end of the finale. But this idea that going through life, there are sacrifices, there are losses, and these things should hopefully make us stronger if you don't let them beat you. So there's elements. I'll get back to that when I talk about the end of the last episode, though. The whole keeping it from Ed thing is great. I loved the tease of that as well, when he gets the message from the cosmonaut who doesn't know it's been kept from him. This is what's beautiful about this, is that a cosmonaut messages him via text on the printer, a memo effect, whatever, a fax. Is that what we're calling it, a fax? I guess it's a fax. It just says, sorry about your condolences about your son, or something to that effect. And Ed doesn't understand it. And Gordo has to kind of lie and go, oh, that's weird. I don't know about that. And this is kind of driving Ed's anger. He's getting frustrated throughout the episode. He smashes some of the Soviets' equipment. And then at the end, of course, he's clearly going to learn the truth as Karen's back on the screen after everything else. Because at this point, it kind of has to be told, because he's had this hint, this seed of something going on. But all of this is great, because one of the other things that I've really liked about this back half of the season is this tease of him running into a cosmonaut. And episode 9 really plays with that, where he comes face to face, and there's a tense moment where the cosmonaut's holding a hammer in his hand. Is he going to have to fight him? But Ed steps out the way. But it does that great thing. They've both got their shields down, so you can't see any faces. It's this very, humanoid shape, because obviously it's a spacesuit, but it's also very unhuman as well, because you can't see any face. It's just a shiny surface. So it's very eerie, and that feeling's there throughout a lot of the episode, which I really like. And obviously the big ending to episode 9 is Ed trapping the cosmonaut, and I thought he might even be killing him at the end. Obviously he just suffocates him enough to knock him out, but he gets him inside the airlock and then starts depressurizing, I guess is the right term. So he has him captive in episode 10, and that's the whole thing that's going. I should also mention Gordo's in therapy. I don't have too much to say about that, except that there is some growth with him and Tracy, where they're very happy when she gets back in episode 10. She thinks he's cheating on her again, but he's like, no, I'm in therapy, which is a big no-no. And that's the weird thing, is like, I think to some extent, we expect the attitude towards the gay community, we expect the racism and the sexism and things like that, but the idea that going to a therapist has got a stigma to it in this time period is something that I don't think I would have necessarily have thought of. I understand it when it is I'm watching it, and it kind of makes sense that there would be a stigma to it, if you go further back, at least in the sense that they would see that as making you unfit to be an astronaut. To be an astronaut, you have to be perfect, and that means you're not perfect. Which is a very dated view, obviously, but it fits the time period, and I thought that was an interesting little wrinkle in things as well. So it was nice to see that. It was nice to see Gordo stick up for Ed a couple times and stick up for his wife, and even Margot, even though she's the one that's been stuck up to a lot, she then sticks up to the head of NASA dude, tells him to F off basically. And that's kind of a big moment in episode 10. There's a lot of good little character beats like that I really appreciated throughout. Aleda's dad is getting deported. I don't have too much to say about this. I'm sure I'm interested in seeing how it plays out next season. It's interesting that she does ask Margot to live with her, and Margot declines, but Margot doesn't know at that point, of course, that the woman who has offered to let her stay with her, but she was living with anyway, also seems to have been evicted at the very least, if not deported, and she's kind of on her own. And she grabs the acceptance letter from the school, and that sets her up for next season. But one of the things that I really loved, the speech from Ellen at the end of the finale, it kind of really brought into light kind of just the central theme of the show and the point of it. Obviously, there's a lot of themes in the show, and there's a lot of social topics that it's playing with and hitting. But this speech at the end kind of almost made me feel like a dum-dum, that I didn't quite get the core reason for this, like why you're tackling all these social issues and these progressive movements in this, like, by today's perspective, a more bigoted time period. Is her speech when she's asked about, is going to space still worth it? Is all this still worth it now that you've lost some people? And she says, I can't remember the exact words, but effectively she says that, it's not because it's easy that we do it because it's hard, because we have to go into the unknown and we have to get better. And I'm like, and as she was saying it, I'm like, this applies 1-to-1 to everything else the show is about society moving forward, and that it's difficult and it's hard, and there's going to be losses along the way, and there's going to be sacrifices, but tomorrow can be better. And I loved it when she said that. Pam smiles a little bit. It's got a sad ending for her, because when she's asked, is there anyone on earth you want to give a message to, and she kind of just says about the fake husband instead. What I thought she was going to do is phrase it in a way that it could be about her husband for the audience, for the in the world, but that Pam would know it was really about her. And she, but she named him and everything, so it kind of, it was a bit of a knife turn. And I love those like conflicting ideas as well. That Pam goes to the friends and family room, but he's kind of freaking out about it and makes him feel nervous because he's so scared. And Ellen has an interesting experience in this episode. She's alone with Deke, and because it feels like they're probably going to die and they're just going into deep space, she ultimately opens up because she figures, it might not matter ultimately. And it's a really sad scene, but I actually think it's effective, and I'm glad it went the way it did. I think, while it would have been heartwarming to have Deke, who's shown some progressive sides, and he really stuck up for the women. He really, he valued that they were equal. They put in the work, and he stuck up for them when it was threatened to be taken away from them. But I do think there is more power in him reacting negatively to her being gay than just like being the perfect TV character who is like, no, that's great, that doesn't bother me, and you know, I'm all for it. And like, him actually showing some signs of disgust and like shock about it, and it being kind of cold and awkward, despite all of his good qualities that we've seen all throughout the season, I thought was a stronger choice for the narrative, for doubts for the character, to show that this is going to be difficult to come out in this time period, even with the changes that are happening. And obviously he did get this like moment of redemption before he died. You know, and that, you know, that Deke died, which is, you know, a really sad thing because he's a great character in this, and I'll miss the actor. But he, you know, he says, don't tell anyone else. And obviously that's not necessarily the best advice, right? You know, long term, that sounds like a really sad piece of advice. But the way he phrases it is a little heartwarming, and he says, there's too many people like me, don't do it. It's coming from kind of a good place. It's coming from a place that obviously this advice should not last, but you understand that for a while she is probably going to be kind of haunted by her experience telling Deke and then his final advice. Because he also says you're destined for great things. You're going to do great things. Obviously, she should be able to do the great things and just be gay. but you know, we're dealing with a society that's not going to accept that, and the challenges of breaking through that, just like the challenges of space and going to the moon, and that it's difficult. And there's, you know, like that. So her final speech just felt like it was encapsulating everything that the show was about. Except, you know, in addition, obviously it's about the space, literally, but it's about everything else as well, which is why the very typical TV trope of like cutting around all the characters and their moments towards the end was really effective. I thought, you know, going back to Karen's story, the idea that, you know, she learned what she's learned and she's this stronger, better person, but it did come at this great loss. And, you know, because we hear some of the speeches like, is Ed's getting into his son's bedroom and, like, you know, seeing things and touching things, and this idea that these next steps in society are just as important, and I mean, hell, they're far more important than just stepping on the moon. But I think the idea of giving this speech and seeing the, you know, the Apollo 11 for all mankind plaque on his son's wall, as it's really about him dealing with the fact that he's lost his son and how difficult that is, really kind of nailed the like why this show exists in a weird way, and how difficult it all is, and how is this new frontier. You know, that's maybe the best way to put it, is that this is from a society's perspective, we're pushing into new frontiers, and that's always true to an extent, but certainly in this time period, in hindsight, because it's the past and because certain things have changed in the past 50, 70 years, yeah, 50 years now, yeah, in the early 70s. You know, it feels archaic to us now. Thankfully archaic, even though sadly some problems still feel like they're, you know, around constantly and it's never completely solved. And that's why it's a constant struggle. That's why the show is completely relevant. That's why all of this is completely valid and explores how things happen. Because if we understand how things happen and change, maybe it gives us a little bit of help in how we think about things in the real world. You know, if you don't learn the lessons of history, you're doomed to repeat it. And I think that maybe also works for alternate history as well. So, no, I loved that final speech. I think it really hit on some things and really just recontextualized the season. And not even, actually, that's not even true. It didn't recontextualize. It just made it all click together in a way where all these themes and all these issues were being discussed, and you had the great space stuff, but the ending kind of just like gave me why that they belong together. And, you know, I think it was probably possible to come to that conclusion before now, but in some ways I'm glad I didn't quite reach that point when I was thinking about it or talking about it, because it made the moment where the show spelled it out to me kind of special. You know, this is kind of a broader storytelling thing to talk about, but, you know, some people are obsessed with being the smart ones when they're watching a show or a movie. I think the best example I can give is horror movies, where, and people may have heard me say this before on other shows, but you get that type of person who is insistent that horror movies aren't scary, and they sit down with their arms folded and say, this isn't scary, I'm going to show that I'm not scared of anything. And then they complain at the end that it wasn't scary. And I'm like, well, yeah, because it's if you're going to go in with that attitude, it never will be. You have to be willing to go along for the ride. You have to be willing for the handshake. It's a handshake, right? The movie puts out its hand, but you have to reach out and do it as well. And if you're thinking about what you're watching, and I often do, it's why I talk about shit. I love thinking about it and talking about it, and other people will enhance things for me. I started doing this because I heard other people do similar things, and I wanted to think about shows. You become, I'm not saying I'm good at it, but you in theory become good at analyzing things because you hear other people analyzing and how they think about things, and it kind of forms and molds your brain to kind of operate that way too, but it enriches things. Anyway, the point I'm getting to is that if you're thinking about things as you're watching it, it's very rewarding when you catch things, and it's very rewarding when you can see the seeds, and when they're paid off later, it feels like you're rewarded for paying attention and rewarded for thinking about things on another level. It's why stuff that's really shallow and doesn't have layers can be really boring to watch, and why certain lighthearted entertainment doesn't quite work for everyone, and it can just feel a little bit hollow because it's just kind of is what it is, and there's nothing else under the surface. And that's not to say there's anything wrong with liking stuff like that. There's definitely things that I do like that is very hollow. I love 80s slasher movies, to go back to the horror. There's some silly shit I like. But that's very rewarding. But that's not to say that I want to be able to pick apart everything, because sometimes, and it's very easy to forget this sometimes, because there are bad writers and there's bad filmmakers and all the rest of it. But a lot of the people who are making television and film are doing it because they're good at it, and they're better at it than I am or I could be. So it's really refreshing when it gives me all of the satisfaction of feeling where it's going and thinking about what its themes are, and not even predicting what the plot's going to be. I'm not saying I predicted things about the finale or anything. I just mean understanding kind of what it's talking about. So every time it comes back to that subject, I feel like I'm being rewarded for knowing that this is what it's about, that this is what it's playing with and what it's saying about it. And it's engaging because of that. But it's also very satisfying when the writers have more in the tank than I have seen, or that I have figured out. And in this case, it enhances everything that I have already thought about. It enhances everything that I have considered up until that point. And because of that, I get this great 1-2 punch of a finale where everything pays off in a way that makes sense to what I was watching and comprehending. But then it also just adds this little extra cherry on top of saying, yeah, and it all falls into one umbrella like this. And all of a sudden, this season as a whole feels super tight and constructed in a way that feels, written out as a whole before they started shooting, where they understood what their themes were for the whole season. Karen's character arc certainly, falls into that. And it's not like Karen's individual plots in some of the earlier episodes were not some of the best things about the show. Some of the scenes were good, and some of the scenes felt a little bit like, okay, and we're going through this conservative woman's kind of denial of things and her fighting back again. Not every single scene individually was necessarily exceptional on its own, right? Or super entertaining or engaging on its own. Somewhere, the scene where she stole Ed's dinner because she was mad was hilarious, but not all of them were. But when I watch this again, and I know sort of what it's building to, and I understand kind of what it's planting for later, it's going to feel more rewarding on that second viewing, because all of the themes are there and everything is crescendoing to some major points. And all of the characters had something in the finale that felt like a nice climactic moment for them. Pam actually getting to go and be involved like a loved one watching Mission Control was even her thing, and she's a relatively smaller character in the grand scheme of the bigger characters. Obviously Karen we've talked to at length. Ed, he has this anger, he's got this cosmonaut kidnapped, and he gets this moment where he gets to bond with them over music. He finally starts to see him as more of another human being rather than the enemy, because he's been fed this propaganda his whole life. Even just his time in the Navy, he has this opinion of what the Soviets are like. He keeps calling them Ivan. He doesn't look at him as a human. And then there's that ominous look from the cosmonaut at the end where he maybe has done something to the base, either bug it or whatever. But by and large, when he finds out that he needs to help to try and save Ellen and Deke, because they're not going to make it to the moon, they're going to just go right past, and he has to go up in the I can't remember exactly what that part's called, but he has to go up and help them. Like, when that's happening, and the cosmonaut Mikhail is like, look, you need to do this quickly. I can help you. Let me help you, right? Like, international rule is that when a ship is in danger, you help it, right? That is just the simple rule of it. And we're not in a war zone here. We're in the ocean, effectively. We're out in no man's land. Like, I actually, I really enjoyed those scenes, and the idea of Ed learning to not like use his anger to deal with this, and that was something that was certainly building up in some of the episodes towards the end. Even the start of the show, had him getting pissed that they lost the race, and it was all about who was the enemy, both like as the Soviets, but even just in NASA. NASA used to have balls. Like, it was about looking at the enemy. Here, he gives that up. He gets help from him. He gives him he sabotaged these rovers, so he's like, here's this part back. So Ed gets that, and obviously gets these emotional beats towards the end. Gordo and Tracy get some stuff. Of course, Margot finally kind of feels like she's one of the team, and even like gives some smiles back to some people in the last episode. And some of it's bigger than others. Some of them have, bigger climactic moments. It goes back to something I was saying in the last video about how the show can kind of rotate through some of the main characters a little bit. Where, in these last few episodes, Ellen's like, such a major character. Whereas Molly, there's got a couple of big scenes in episode 9, but she's been more diminished after her big spotlight in the middle of the season. And, not every character, I'd say like Tracy and Gordo, like, don't have a ton in the final episode, but they have a lot of stuff before that. And so you don't necessarily get like a ton of everyone in the finale, but everyone gets something to kind of like just, throw a final curve onto their ending, and kind of give them this send off for the season. It made me very excited to check out season 2, which I'll probably do before too long, because I am fascinated to see where it goes from here and how it continues to explore these ideas. And obviously the big sequence in episode 10 with Ed going up, and he can't quite reach them or dock with them, so he ultimately slowly throws the fuel so that they can land. And we get the big scene of Ellen jumping out and just making it and only just grabbing on. It's all very exciting and very, very tense. The way they're just slowly spinning and then that slowly drifting across is it's a very different. There's something about doing scenes like this in space, because you have this kind of like natural slowdown to it. You don't need slow motion in space. It's already slow. But it's still tense, because if you miss it, that's it. It's gone. It's gone forever. You drop that wrench, you're not getting it back, kind of thing. So I really liked all the space sequences in episode 9 and 10. They were definitely the most exciting, I think, that the show's had. Which shows great restraint and shows great structuring to the season as well. They kind of they had some big moments early on for sure, but they crescendoed the set pieces very nicely going up to the last episode. So I don't feel like it peaked early on by any means. I think the set pieces probably peaked in episode 9, but that's okay, because that's like that's like the penultimate episode, and there was still great stuff in episode 10 in that sense. And the emotional peaks absolutely came in episode 10. Obviously Deke's wife finding out about his death, that he was gone, it was handled very well. Everyone looking, her realizing that they're about to give her bad news, and then coming in and everyone. I'm getting the grave site on the moon next to the monument that Ed made for Shane. It's just it's all very great stuff, and I'm honestly like, I think I'm so impressed with the finale and just how sort of rounded up everything was. You don't see a lot of Molly's husband, but there's a little moment between Molly's husband looking over at Karen in the waiting room, the watching room, just these little bonds that have been formed and connections that have been made between some of the characters that are, like we're seeing where they are now, in the light of all this going down. And it makes me excited to see what the next season will be. I don't really know exactly. I think I know that the third season's set in the 90s, so I would maybe assume that we're getting some 80s stuff in season 2, but like I don't really know. And I'm glad I don't know. I'm glad that I'm fairly getting blind to what we're doing. And I do wonder if Mikhail will be back, and if we'll see more interaction with the Americans and the Soviets in space. And yeah, I'm trying to think back and see if there's any sequences or just specific moments of like direction that I want to call out, because there was definitely a lot of good little moments in how it handled certain things. Simple little stuff like just what face it cuts to right after someone says something, or everything. Actually, one of the great bits of tension in the last episode is that Ed's not answering the calls. He's too busy with his prisoner, and they eventually use Morse code and the lights to like get his attention, which I thought was actually a little obvious, bizarrely. I actually, as soon as the scene started and the lights were flickering, and he complains about it, I'm like, oh, it's Morse code. This is how they're trying to get to him. Because they try to get to him, and obviously, once he sees it's an SOS, and he's like, oh shit, I need to help someone. Like, he's literally the only hope, the other two have of surviving. But it's a good little bit, though, in the middle of the episode where they're trying to reach him. Like, Margot's coming up with this plan that's going to involve him saving the day, and they just can't get to him. And it's the idea that there's a risk here that Ed's anger was almost going to kill more people. It's quite a big deal, I think. And like what almost could have happened just by him being away in his own world and showing that he has to be connected to other people, that he has to be, with them, and not just the cosmonaut, but just in general, he has to have those connections. He can't go off all like so, and that kind of plays into his like standing down scene, because he wants to stay in the moon. He doesn't want to leave Ellen on her own, and she sort of insists and makes a call and says, "No, I'm the new commander of Jamestown, and I'm relieving you of your duty." And he accepts that, which is a really nice beat as well, that he's accepting her word here as the new commander of the station. Not that he ever showed signs of not taking orders from a woman per se, but it just. This idea that he immediately, as soon as she sort of not quite pulled rank per se, but got serious with it, he did like immediately get professional and accept it. But for a moment, it was almost like he was scared to go back to Earth and actually face the horror of like dealing with the death of his son with his wife. And I think that's like a part of it here. Also the idea that he feels protective of the base at this point, and that it's home, and whatever cabin fevers come with that. But I do wonder, is Mikhail going to come and knock on the door and say hello to Helen? And if he does, what is her reaction to that? There's so many potential things. I don't expect we're picking up straight away in season 2. I expect there'll be a bit of a time jump, just because the show's been jumping ahead in time at a relative pace. The first season starts in 69 and ends in, I think, 74, end of 74, maybe just the start of 75. So I suspect there's probably another little time jump. And some of the little, I don't know if I've mentioned this throughout the season, but the little snippets of what's meant to sound like recorded audio from the president. There's like stuff with Kennedy and Nixon talking to each other, and all these little details to try and give it this feeling like it is a part of history. Nice touch, I thought. Obviously, I don't know if there's any real audio. Obviously, there's some parts of it that are definitely impersonators doing a decent impression, because they're specifically referencing things that there's no way they pulled from a real conversation. But I enjoyed that little, just kind of like, there's like a little texture on top just to give it a feel, which I appreciated. So, no, it's good stuff. But yeah, season was pretty excellent. I think, you know, there's maybe one or two episodes that feel a little quieter. My biggest critique is probably that you don't really feel the spark of what the show is, I think, until the end of episode 2. So if you just watch episode 1, you might not actually be hooked, but I think if you watch the first 3, I think you're in, and then I think you're rewarded for the time you've invested by the end of the season. And I was excited about watching the next episode, certainly by the time I got halfway through the season, and I am excited about starting season 2. I'll probably do that very soon. So by all means, let me know what you thought of season 1 of For All Mankind. I appreciate it. I got a good comment on the last video talking about how the technology that they're actually using in here is some theoretical, some's actually based on real plans that were made for certain things that were now obviously not used, or you know, so, but like that attention to detail is pretty great, and there is a level of authenticity that's here. It's kind of it reminds me in a weird way of The Expanse, where The Expanse was this show set in the future and a lot of it's theoretical, but they paid a lot of attention to space physics and tried to keep it as realistic as they could. And you felt that sense in the show, and it made it feel a bit more grounded, and it gave all the action that happened in space a bit more weight. And I think, you know, you watch this and you feel a sense of some of the more pardon the expression, down to earth space movies where, you know, this is very much science fiction because we're doing things that never happened, and we're going further than we have done. Although I did just read that the new space program, which is sending up an unmanned ship or probe or whatever, is they're planning to lead that to some people back on the moon, and possibly, you know, it sounded like the plot of season 1 of For All Mankind almost, that we're finally maybe getting around to NASA being allowed and thinking about doing some of this shit, and that's kind of wild actually, and kind of fun, exciting. You know, there is there's a sense of adventure about getting into space that I think is very appealing, and a wonderment to it despite all the dangers, and why it's worth going there, to you know, even when there's some risk, and obviously it's a very dangerous thing to do in a lot of ways, and if anything goes wrong, like, yeah, your life is in peril, but there is something just kind of really effing cool about space. And not everyone's going to share that feeling, but I've always felt that way. It's partly why I was drawn to science fiction in the first goddamn place. So, yes, all very neat, and I am positively just titillated. I don't want to say excited again. I'm excited to watch season 2. That's all I'm trying to say. But that's For All Mankind. Let me know what you thought of the season in the comments. Like, subscribe, ding the bell for notifications, all that stuff. Get us on the Twitters at mailed_fudge for channel updates. If you want to support all the content, you can hit the super thanks button below the video. And of course, you can go over to patreon.com/mailfuzztv and help keep all the content coming on a monthly basis. The support that we get from the audience is what keeps everything going and lets me devote all the time I do to making silly reviews and analyzing things, and hopefully you enjoyed it. So thank you very much for watching. I always appreciate it. Keep watching TV. Have you got any vanilla?